dignity. And this is a reality survivors of gender-based violence are often denied. And although unpacking gender-based violence can be very difficult, I think the most critical part here is for us to remain hopeful, because if anything, our stories are still being written, not only as individuals, but as a country. And I think for now, I'm just going to hand over to our esteemed panel to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Sasha. And thank you to the organizers for affording us this opportunity. I am Umukhulu Daunyane Mguni. I am the founder and the executive director of an NPO called GBV Monitor South Africa. And what we do there is basically to really try to elevate our national conversation around how we frame GBV, our understanding of GBV, the kind of solutions that we need to be looking at to co-create the future that is more equitable, a future where women and young children can really claim to have had the chance to access justice. And how we do that is through 3 focus areas in our work, and that is through research. The second thing that we also look at is to do a systemic evaluation of the rural criminal justice system. And the reason that we were looking at that specifically was from a realization in the work that I've been doing previously, that when we do talk about justice and access to justice, people who are in marginalized communities are often left in the periphery in that aspect. And so I identified that as an area of concern, an area that needs immediate and urgent action, and that is to center the voices and the experiences of women who are in rural areas. The last thing, which is really the star, I call it the star of our organization's work, is our online GBV tracker. And what the online tracker intends to do is really to bring a nuanced assessment and an evaluation of the experiences of women once they enter the criminal justice system. We are interested in getting an understanding of what are the factors behind women who drop out of the criminal justice system. We know that women report. The stats tell us that women are reporting these incidents. But at the back end of that, we know that, less than 9% of reported incidents of GBV actually secure a conviction at the very end. So that tells you that there is a problem. There is a missed opportunity that we need to see how we can plug ourselves in there. So that encompasses briefly the work that we do. Thank you.
Amazing stuff.
All right. Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Musisiwe Kamulani Khadima, and I'm an attorney and research coordinator at the Center for Applied Legal Studies. Now, Center for Applied Legal Studies, CALS, we work through research, through advocacy, and through litigation, really across 5 intersecting programs. So we work around business and human rights, environmental justice, gender justice, civil and political justice, as well as rural democracy and what it means to have home and land. But particularly, we've done a lot of work with grassroots organizations, community networks, etc. And something that we've realized in our work with activists as a whole is really the experiences of victimization. And this prompted us to conduct research to try to see what are the experiences of activists in South Africa, and what are these victimization experiences that activists are having. And in addition, working on a second report that focuses on different kinds of activists specifically. And one of those activists is gender activists, or activists that fight for gender rights. And really realizing the different experiences that activists that fight for gender rights and gendered issues are facing, and what that means in the broader scheme of things for fights against gender-based violence, for fights against patriarchy, abuse of power, etc., and what it means for that space of communicating dissent, of that space of freedom of expression no longer being what it's supposed to be. What does that mean overall for the country? And that's the work that we do.
They do a lot. Hi, my name is Tammy Dish from the Tammy Dish Foundation. And I think that we were founded just in 2005, 6, I think. And the work that we do has really been about bringing communities together and bringing the entire sector, the LGBTQI sector, together. I think our strength in the past has been being able to create platforms such as these ones as well, where we allow people to gather and to engage and to try and find a unified kind of solution to some of the challenges that we face. So I think most of the work that we do is also referral kind of stuff, because as we take on these new cases or discoveries that people channel to us, we also recognize that we're not perhaps the people to deal with the cases firsthand, but we do have a lot of other groups of companies or organizations that deal with the work. So we work largely on referrals, and we fell into it. You know, we organized a fun event called the Feather Awards, and then they said it was a queer event, and then everything that is queer will get an email. Hi, this just happened to me. This just happened to me. So ours is to channel where that goes, but it's also forced us in the past to kind of lean in a bit more and to have a clearer understanding of the needs of communities. So we bridge the gap. I often say that we play the role of being like the Holy Spirit. Yes, and somewhere in there, we must be able to know someone who can do something and connect the dots and make sure that we find a solution. Yep.
So I think let's actually just then start with the fundamentals, because I think what's key in bringing about change is definitely defining the problem. So I'd like us as the collective to basically unpack any harmful social beliefs or cultural norms that play a role in reinforcing this power imbalance, and in so perpetuating violence against women and other marginalized groups.
Yeah, I mean, when we refer to, socialization and how that, plays a critical part in how young, boyhood is formed, or manhood is informed. That is part of the socialization process that we are talking about. I always say that in order to really try to eliminate GBV, you need to start them young. And that entails teaching young boys that part of being a boy doesn't mean you can be naughty and grab a little girl's arm and twist it in order to get her attention, right? You've already crossed the boundary there. That's abuse. It's violent behavior. Yes. Telling young girls that, oh, cross your legs, don't sit like that. You're already starting to socialize young girls to being constrained, right? When we talk about how religion plays a role in GBV, we are talking about the man is the head and the woman is the neck. You're already disempowering the woman in that, because if you're defining, your role in a marriage as that of the neck that only allows for the head to turn in a particular direction, that comes from a place of disempowerment. We are talking about religion and how that plays a very critical part in creating this disbelief that women in marriages can't get raped. Your body belongs to your husband. You must always make yourself available to your partner. Those are the kind of, gender norms that are really entrenched in society, that creates this cycle that just does not end, and it perpetuates violence. So that would be, my few points on that. But actually, just to add to this, we need to start creating a culture where our initial response to GBV is to believe survivors when they speak. Our initial response is always to second guess the victim or the survivor, to look for reasons. She is an attention seeker. She is looking to ruin Tabor's career. So those are just a few things that I would say are important when we have our conversations in our so-called spaces, our so-called social circles, when we have friends who make remarks that are filled with sexual innuendo, and it's supposed to be a joke, but it's not a joke because it's such a serious matter. That is GBV, continuing to entrench us, continuing to keep women silenced, this culture of silence that perpetuates. And these are the small ways. You really don't need to be doing anything big and dramatic. It's in the small actions that you start to take. And then the one person, just on that one day, who you can have a conversation with, and they leave that conversation more enlightened, maybe uncomfortable, and that is also okay. Part of us growing is to be okay with discomfort, to be okay with that moment of tension, to walk into that tension and to walk into that discomfort, and realize that we all are going through a learning and a growth process. Nobody has the template, as to what this thing should be or what this thing looks like, but it's important to always have an agreement, a consensus on what are we talking about when we say bodily autonomy?
Yes.
What are we talking about when we talk about GBV and its different manifestations? Whether that's financial abuse, psychological abuse. There needs to be a consensus across the board on what these things are.
We make a joke about a lot of things, and I think for a while, I've always said that it takes a personal experience also for one to get into a room and say, I was quiet at some point when this comment was made, and I didn't say anything, but that was some kind of violation. And I think it happens within our circles, and we watch it and we laugh about it. I mean, people make jokes about it, and I think also sometimes, and you could use like both approach for this, where others prefer calling people out. I prefer calling people in because I think there's more power in us in like teaching somebody else about our experience. Nobody has knowledge of anyone's back end story, and we do stupid things like spank somebody's bum walking across. I mean, like, I'm a gay man, and there's another gay man who feels like it's okay for them to spank my bum, and it's like, no, it's actually not cool. Just because we're gay doesn't mean that I actually appreciate that. I mean, consent is a big thing that must become part of our conversation. Earlier on, she was talking about religion and religion playing its part, as well as culture. Like, I mean, I the other day in a long conversation with friends over great wine, I was like, I can't believe that we've actually allowed culture and people who abuse culture to dictate who we must be in our world and in our society. I can't believe that we erase the existence of humans on a daily basis and everything else that's tied to it. Like, I have to sit and go to KwaPata in the Eastern Cape and be told by a king there that I can't come in wearing a dress because I'm a man. Meanwhile, they wrapped around in just a cloth and beaded work. I'm just like, there's a disconnect somewhere there, because there's just, we're not, why is my existence not, seen, acknowledged? Why is my appearance on a daily basis a struggle? You ask yourself why young girls not safe walking, or young guys or human beings, why are they not safe for walking on the streets wearing whatever it is they want, So expression is a big conversation, because a lot of times when you do go to report these cases, they'll say things to you, like the system that we have, which is kind of built to work against the victims. said, but you go to a police station and they'll ask you, what were you wearing? What did you say? What happened? Give us history on all of these things. And it's always like, let's give it what we're talking about, a 24-hour watch or 48-hour watch before we decide on how serious this case is. And so when we talk about those things, we have to also look at how systemic this thing is and how it's just built to not work for the victim. The victim in this country is not the priority.
I also think about the saying that every woman knows someone that's been sexually assaulted, but if you ask men, they don't know anybody who sexually assaulted someone. And that tells you something, because it speaks again to accountability. It speaks again to what my fellow panelists have said as well, being able to hold other people accountable, to hold one another accountable. And that looks different, right? It could be, I'm holding you accountable, my friend, because the way that you're behaving or what you're saying or what you're doing, that's not okay. Or holding people accountable in bigger spaces, in your workplace, for example, different sorts of situations. What are we doing to hold one another accountable? And this also goes back to the bigger systems. So then you have the police, then you have the criminal justice system, etc. And there's this complete disintegration of what it's supposed to do for survivors and how it's supposed to work for survivors. But on top of that, there is an accountability for anyone that's there, for how the system is working, for how the system needs to change, And I think as soon as these conversations have been had over and over again. Everybody is aware about the fallouts. I'll talk about the criminal, but the fallouts even with the criminal justice system, it's changes that have been implemented, and what are the ways that those that are supposed to implement these changes, how are they being held accountable for these, So that it's a response socially within society, but it's also a response within the systems that's supposed to work as guards, as if it doesn't work out, what then happens within the systems? How are then survivors getting solution, getting justice, getting all sorts of whatever justice looks like for a survivor? But the systems that are there in place, how do we make sure that they work the way that they're supposed to be working, so that there isn't this continuous, almost secondary victimization, almost continuous of not even wanting to hold perpetrators accountable because you let the system fall apart.
Yeah.
It's not almost, it's always.
Always.
always secondary victimization.
Yeah, I think so. Now that we understand where this stems from, and I think you guys unpacked it pretty well, let's fast forward to 2022. And I think, Omogelo, this one is for you, for the Gender-Based Violence Monitor. What does 2022 look like in terms of stats relative to that of previous years? What are we working with? What is South Africa's reality right now?
Thank you for that. We live in a country where women are just not safe. And that is not to say women are not safe outside and in public spaces. They're not safe at home. They're not safe at work. And the stats tell the cases that we have been looking at GBV Monitor South Africa. But just to give you an overview before coming back to us at the organization, when we look at the trends from the SAPS criminal quarter crime stats report, we see that in one quarter we had about 9,500 rape incidents that were reported. And then in the, August to December period, we had 11,315 incidents that were reported. So that tells us a number of things. It tells us first that women are making use, they are trying to utilize the resources that are available to them. And that is going to the police station to report that this is what has happened to me. The second thing is that it also shows us that there is a consistent increase of GBV incidents, and that is historical till now. So whether it is an increase that says to us that it means more women are being victimized, or whether it is that women are now having an increased confidence to go to a police station to report. That is another discussion. I think that is something that is worth looking into. But what the stats are also telling us is that black women and black women who are of working class are far more vulnerable to being victimized as people who would then experience GBV. And that tells us that that is something that we should be looking into. There needs to be a solution and additional support mechanisms that should be in place specific to a rural context, specific to the challenges that, you know, women in peri-urban rural areas are facing, right? And what we have picked up at the organization is that, because our data sources, I just need to track back a little bit. So where we pick up our cases is through the media and through assistance from the National Prosecuting Authority. And one of the things that we are now looking at is seeing that a lot of the cases that are reported in the media are of women who are in urban areas. So we are talking about the Tsehofatsopules, the Karabo Mokwenas, the Nositelom Debenis. These are women who are in urban areas, East London, Rudderport, Uinene was in Cape Town, right? So what does that start to communicate to society? What kind of a narrative is now being built in our understanding of GBV? Is that GBV only matters when it's the voices and the experiences of women who are in urban areas who are suffering. We don't know what is happening to Omoholo who lives in Tabanchu, or rural areas 50, 60 kilometers from Bloemfontein. We don't hear those stories. It is an injustice in that those voices remain unheard. It is an injustice in that every time the media gives us, you know, a case, it is of these people in the social class. It invisibilizes and delegitimizes those experiences. The second thing that we are also looking at, and something that I'm now starting to think deeply about from GBV Monitor, is that the cases of women who are reporting to police are very few that represent white women. Now, we don't know if it's because white women possibly have far more resources and could look at other means, right, for access to justice than to go to a police station. So out of the 111 cases that we are looking at, there's only 3 white women who are on our tracker. So there's a conversation that we need to have there in terms of intersectionality when we're talking about GBV. Who are the victims? It can't be that it's just black women. White women are victims of GBV, you know. And when women then start to look at ways of getting justice, what does that look like for them? So the stats, which, you know, one of my panelists has already mentioned, is that we have a less than 9% conviction rate for rape cases. So what does that mean when the quarterly crime stats come out and we're told that 9,000 cases have been reported, right? That tells us that only a few hundred of those 9,000 women who have reported will get a conviction further down the line. So this is exactly why we need to be very critical of when we read the stats and what kind of a meaning we start to derive from them. I was very critical recently when Minister Cele released the quarterly crime stats, because he made a statement that it's a catastrophe, you know, as if he is not someone who doesn't have the power to do anything about it, right? It is a catastrophe because one of the things that I highlighted in my assessment of the crime stats is that Lusikisiki, which is a rural village in the Eastern Cape, has remained as a top 3 area where police, top 3 in the country with the highest incidents that have been reported of rape. But what is being done about it? It is not enough To have these stats and to say this is an accountability, you know, an exercise of accountability, an exercise of transparency to say this is what is happening and then leaving it there. We need to go further and say what are the stats telling us in terms of what we should be doing. So that would be my contribution there.
Yeah. So I think just going back to the trends, Umaholo, I think we are a part of a generation who has birthed many a movement. We've seen #MeToo, we've seen #AmINext. Which movements do you think have had an impact and why?
I would say #the total shutdown is definitely a movement that stands out to have gone just, you know, tweeting, but it was followed by important action. There was a lot of mobilization that was done, a lot of coordination to bring activists together across the spectrum to say it is enough. We cannot continue in this way. So total shutdown stands out for me because we can now attribute, you know, the NSP on GBV to the total shutdown movement. It was through that mobilization that they did for the president to now start to take action to say, we really do have a national crisis and we can't continue in that way. You know, there are other social media hashtags that we've had. I mean, we've had #AmINext, we had #Justice for Tsheho, Justice for Nositelo, #MenAreTrash. And they are beneficial to the cause because the conversation comes back in a very public way that you cannot ignore on GBV.
Yes.
But what we have failed in our social media activism is to really take it further. We have men like Arthur